All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei Haba Alinu L'Tova, Dr. Linda Weinberg for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this month in loving memory of her husband of 53 years. Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz Moshe Ben Avram David, Avram and Shindi Kalman of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this month in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kalman, and Alexander and Frederica David. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld, Le'ilui Nishmas Devora Reza Bas Yisrael, Dorothy Hack Goldberg, a very special neshama who is truly missed, whose yard site is today. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, that Echad Baruch Hu will Emeretz Hashem return our hostages and allow our soldiers to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. But with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Kuf Chaf Hey. I'm sorry? A different system worked out. I got it, I promise. As I said, so today's daf is Kuf Chav Hey 125. We are picking up Emeretz Hashem on the bottom of Kuf Chav Dalid 124b, and we left off 6 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, so still in the topic of Bechar. Still in the topic of the inheritance of the firstborn, and specifically, again, under what circumstances does a firstborn inherit? What is considered? Now, remember again, the one thing that everyone agrees on, the principle that everyone agrees on, well, the biblical principle that everybody agrees on is that a bechar gets a double portion. Okay, right? That's midoraisa. The other principle that everyone agrees on is that a bechar inherits on muchzak and not ra'oi. He only goes ahead and inherits that which the father owns, quote unquote, but not which the estate is entitled to. The machlokes that we saw yesterday between Rabbi and the Rabbanon was what about essentially shevach, appreciation or improvement that occurs by itself? Is that considered to be halacha l'maisa again ra'oi, or is that considered to be muchzak? That that is our ongoing dispute. Now, in addition to that, at the end of yesterday's daf, we came upon something additional, which is what we're going to start with today, about what about a loan? What about a loan? So halacha l'maisa again, if a loan comes due to the estate after that, so remember again, we've got Avraham, father Avraham died, left behind 2 sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. In our model, Yitzchak is the bechar. So now the shaila is, if a loan comes due, what is Yitzchak entitled to in that loan? So remember again, and then that discussion has 2 parts to it as well, which is if there is principal, Karen, and if there is ribis, and if there is interest. So again, that's our machlokas. So let's delve into that now. So the Gemara says, Ikla Ameimar la'asr. So Ameimar came to our city, Vidarish, and he darshed in the following: Bechar notal pi shnayim b'milva, avalo b'ribis. So Ameimar darshed that a bechar, a firstborn, takes a double portion in the milva, in the principal, but not in the ribis, not in the interest. Now we'll say, so remember again, we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, what is the logic? What is the logic behind this distinction? So remember again, what is the logic behind saying that a bechar takes pi shnayim in a loan? The logic behind that is because, remember, the way we review it is, who does the money belong to? Right? The money belonged to Father Avraham. So the way we would view it is, Father Avraham once had that money in his possession. He then lent it out. Right? So therefore, again, out the money, out the principal, so the estate is considered to be muchzak, considered to own it. Ribis, on the other hand, interest payment, was never owned by Father Avraham. So because it was never owed him, therefore it's viewed as what? It's viewed as ra'i. And because it's viewed as ra'i, therefore halacha l'maisa, again, the bechar will not be entitled. Now, both say, you understand what a tremendous chiddush that is. Remember, there's a lot of things happening over here. Remember that in the laws of loans, right? Hilchos Halvaos 101. How do we view a halva? How do we view a loan? Milva lahotza nitna. When you lend someone money, who's the owner of that money? Who's the owner of the money? The borrower, right? In other words, and when money is returned, we never view halachically as if the original money that was borrowed is the same money that was returned. Rather, we view it as different money which is returned. So just to point out over here again, this is a dramatic departure from that general conventional understanding of loans. Really what we're just saying over here is, since the money conceptually originated with Avram, and the money is coming back to Avram. Even though we recognize it's different money, the estate is considered to be muhsak for the principal. Therefore, the Bechar will get Pishnaim in the principal. But Ribis, the interest money, it's new money. It's new money. It never existed before. Father Avraham never had any shaykhus to that ribis money. So because of that, that's going to be roi, and therefore the Bechar will not get Pishnayim in it. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, Amrli Nardoi, Amrli said, Nardoi Tamahu. So the truth is, this is the Nardoim going according to their reasoning. How so? The Amr Rabba. Okay, so the truth is that the Bach changes this around a little bit. In the Bach's version, if you take a look, it's in the left-hand margin by the little letter Beis. Again, it doesn't change the information, it just changes the flow of the Gemara. He reads it as Nardoi L'Tamayu. So the Nardoim go according to that reasoning. The Amar Rav Nachman, Gavu Karka Ein Lo, Gavu Ma'os Yesh Lo. The Rabba Amar, Gavu ma'os eilo, gavu karka yeshlo. Okay, see, he just changes the order around a little bit. It's first Rav Nachman and Rabba. So Rabba say Rav Nachman and Rabba were both from Narda, both from the Babylonian city of Narda. So now let's just read that again. We could just read it even the way the Gemara says it. Amrli Narda, Tamar Rabba, gavu karka yeshlo. So Rabba say, so okay, let's give a little bit of context over here. If halacha l'maisa, actually, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam is 3 lines up from before it gets wide. So Nardoi l'tamahu, Ameimar kirav Nachman svirle, de tarvayu havim min Narda, ki de amra Ameimar, ana min Narda, ana usvirle, de tarvayu svirle, de ma'os sha'adam chayv l'chavero, havim mochsakpan. So here's what we're going to see. Ameimar, who made a statement, remember again, both just to follow the flow. What was Ameimar's statement? Ameimar said, when the estate collects a debt, the Bechar gets Pishnayim in the loan, doesn't get Pishnayim in the ribis. By the way, when we say the Bechar doesn't get Pishnayim in the ribis, what does that mean? What does that mean? Right? It's just inheritance. Again, just to be clear, it doesn't mean he doesn't get something. In other words, it means that he shares in it the same way with all the brothers. Because remember, again, on both sides, the distinction between Ra'ui and Muchsak is only a din in Pishnayim. So heirs inherit everything, even stuff that the estate is entitled to. So when we say that the Bechar doesn't get Pishnayim, it just means that he shares in whatever it is, just like one of the regular brothers. Okay, so now, Ameimar holds like Rav Nachman. What did Rav and Rav Nachman say? Gavu karka. So let's go back. So now look at the Rashbam. First wide line. Gavu karka. Bechov milva avian. Eino lebechar pishnayim. Demos halvo velo karka. Aval gavu mos yeshlo. Shari mos halvo. Ubamos chashin le muchsak. Okay, so let's go through this for a second. So watch. Rabbi says like this. Same case. Father Avraham lent someone, we'll just call him Ruvain. Lends Reuven $1 million. Okay, now Father Avraham dies. The estate is collecting the debt. State's collecting the debt. So Rabbi says like this: Gavu karka. If halacha l'maisa, the estate collected land. Let's say again the loan was secured. The loan was secured by real estate, and Reuven didn't pay in cash. So instead, the estate collects land. So Rabbi says yeshlo halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, again, the Bechar will get Pishnayim in the land. Gavu mos ein lo. But if halacha l'maisa, again, he goes ahead and collects. If they collect money, the Bechar doesn't get Pishnayim. So we'll say. So just follow me over here for just a second. The Rashbam is organized according to the Bach, so he switches around Rabba and Rav Nachman. So if you look, we're going to go out of order on the Rashbam for just a moment. Take a look at the last 2 lines of the Rashbam. Gavu karka mibal chov yeshel bechar pishnayim. The high karka shtabid lavon b'chayav ukemi shayalo b'mashkon dami v'chashin ale muchsak. So we'll say, watch this. Watch this, fascinating. So Rabbi says like this, right? Here's the case. Let's get the case down because it's going to be the case that follows us through. Should have really started earlier today. I thought it was small enough. All right, good. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. So Gemara says as follows. So remember again, here's the case. Father Avraham lent Reuven $1 million. Debt was secured by real estate. Father Avraham dies, debt is uncollected. Kids come to collect the estate. 2 kids, Yitzchak and Yishmael. Yitzchak is the Bechar. Rabbi says like this: if they go ahead and they collect karka, so then ultimately Yitzchak gets Pishnayim. What's the logic? The logic is because since the debt was secured by real estate, Father Avram was muchsak in that real estate. So because he was muchsak, therefore again his bechar gets a double portion. On the other hand, if they collect cash, so cash is roi, cash is not muchsak, therefore again Yitzchak and Yishmael will share in it in the same way. That's Rabba. On the other hand, Rav Nachman Amar Gavu Maos Yeshlo, Gavu Karka Einlo. On the other hand, Rav Nachman holds the opposite. Rav Nachman says, Gavu Karka, right? If you take a look, if you look at the Rashbam first, now back to the first wide line. Bechov Milva Avin Einlo Lebechar Pishnaim De Mos Halvo Velo Karka Ala Gavu Mos Yeshlo Shari Mos Halvo Uva Mos Chashin Le Muchsak. Rav Nachman says just the opposite. Rav Nachman says no. If the debt was repaid with money, then Yitzchak gets Pishnaim. Why? Because the estate is considered to be Muchsak with money. Why? Because Father Avram lent $1 million cash to Reuven. Now granted, even though it's different cash that Reuven is paying back with, but Avram was muchsak in the money, as opposed to Karka, which again, the Karka was there as collateral, right? It was there ultimately, again, to secure the debt, but you can't say that Father Avram was ever in actual possession of the money. So fascinating machlokas, riveting machlokas. So says the Gemara, Amar le'abai le'rabbo. So Abai said to Rabba, Lididach kasha, Rav Nachman kasha. So Abai says to Rabba, the truth is, Rabba, I'm going to tell you, both your position and Rav Nachman's position are problematic. How so? Lididach kasha. So according to you, Rabba, so let's remember again, so just to get our positions right? So Rabba holds, if payment was made in land, ultimately again, Bechar gets Pishnayim. Why? Because since the debt was secured by real estate, the estate is considered to be muchsak in the real estate. On the other hand, collected money, Bechar doesn't get Pishnayim because money is just is the muchsak. Rav Nachman collected money, ultimately again, you get Pishnayim. Because again, Father Avram had money, lent money, and therefore is muchsak in the money. Karka, on the other hand, no pishnayim. Fine. So Abai says to Rabba, I have problems with both of your positions. So let's go. So the Yidach Kasha. So he starts with Rabba. Rabba, I'll tell you what the problem with your position is. Top of Kuf Chav Chay 125. Maishna mos delo. Rabba. According to Rabba, you say that if Reuven pays back the estate with money, so Yitzchak does not get Pishnayim, right? And why not? Why not, Rabba? What's your logic? Delav honey mos shavak avun. Because at the end of the day, the money that Reuven is paying back the estate with is what? It's not the same money that Father Avraham lent him. It's different money. So therefore, again, you can't call this muchsak. The estate didn't own this money. This is new cash. So again, Sabai says to Rabba, Karkanami lav ha karka shavak avun. You can say something with the land. At the time that Father Avraham died, did Father Avraham own the land? Did he own the land? No, he didn't own the land, right? At the end of the day, again, there's a lien against the land, but a lien is not ownership. A lien is not ownership. So because a lien is not ownership, therefore again, the same way according to you, Rabba, that Yitzchak doesn't have a Pishnayim claim in the karka, because the karka, in the money, because the money ultimately that is returned was not the money that was owned by the estate at the time of Father Avram's death. So too again, the land that is collateralized was also not owned by Father Avram at the time of his death. Furthermore, ha the Amar mistaber taima dibnei ma'arava. Okay, so now we're throwing in another piece over here. Furthermore, you Rabba also said that the logic of bnei Eretz Yisrael, bnei ma'arava, was sound. Di'i kadim safta v'zavna zvini. All right, so let's talk about this for just a second. Even though we're going to have this case at the end of the Amud, let's just talk about it now because everybody is going to reference it. Take a look at the Rashbam Va'od Ha'amar. It's the third line down. Rabba da Amar bu'ovda da hi safta da havile bas ben bina. Hanasua lebal, uruya havyahi bas liyarsha. Umeisai. So let me just say this case quickly outside, then we'll see it again. A man is on his deathbed. We'll call him Reuven. Reuven is on his deathbed. Reuven says, I want my property to go to Safta, to my grandmother. But after Safta dies, I want it to go to my heir. I want it to go to my heir. Right? Reuven says to my heir. Happens to be the only heir that Reuven had was a daughter. Okay, so Safta's got the property now, and by the way, this makes the most sense if you understand that Reuven was a shchiv mira, right? So Reuven was very ill, so he's on his deathbed. He wants his grandmother to be taken care of for the duration of her life. So he says, let my property go to Safta. When Safta dies, I want it to come back to my heir. Fine. In the meantime, Reuven has a daughter. We'll just call her Rachel, right? Rachel goes ahead and gets married, Yaakov. So what ends up happening? Rachel predeceases Safta. Rachel predeceases Safta. Now Safta dies. So now what happens? Yaakov comes along, and Yaakov says, Yaakov who was the husband of Rachel who passed away, who was the daughter of Avram, who gifted the parcel of property to Safta. So Yaakov comes along and says, I am the heir. I am the heir because my wife was the one who would have inherited the property from Safta. So now again, I'm coming in her stead. So also we're going to see there is a raging machlokes as to whether or not Yaakov is correct. So we're going to see that case inside in just a little bit. The Gemara is referencing it over here because Abaye is bringing this up to Rabbah. He says, Rabbah, there's another problem with your position. What's the problem with your position? Because you said, Mistaber Taimad B'nei Ma'arava, you said the logic of Bnei Eretz Yisrael is more sound. How so? Di kadim Safta v'Zavna Zavina Zavini. Because you held if Safta were to sell the land, right? If Safta were to sell the land, let's say when Safta was alive, right? So Safta got the property. What happens if Safta were to sell it? So the halacha is the sale would be a valid sale. What does that show you? That Rachel's entitlement is not tantamount to ownership, right? Even though Rachel stands to inherit it when Safta dies, but you see that entitlement is not tantamount to ownership. So what Abaye is saying to Rabbah is, I don't understand that halacha l'maisa. How can you say that a bachar is entitled to pi shnayim of collateralized land when you're on record elsewhere as clearly indicating that entitlement is not the same as actual ownership? Again, that'll make a little bit more when we get to that case. The point over here is that Abaye is asking this two-pronged kasha on Rabbah. Next, Abaye says, Ul Rav Nachman, Kasha. I have a problem with Rav Nachman also. What's that problem with Rav Nachman? So remember, we'll say, what was the position of Rav Nachman? Rav Nachman said that halacha l'maisa, if the estate collects money as repayment for the debt, the bachar is going to get pi shnayim. Right, but if it collects land, property, will not get pi shnayim. So we'll say, what's the logic? What's the logic there? Because halacha l'maisa, again, when it comes to money, so the estate is considered to be muchsak in money. Why? Since Father Avram had the $1 million, he lent the $1 million. Therefore, halacha l'maisa is considered to be muchsak in that $1 million. Karka, on the other hand, was only collateralized. So because only collateralized, therefore it's not considered muchsak. Because it's not considered muchsak, therefore halacha l'maisa, the bachar does not get pi shnayim. So the Gemara says, "Listen, Rav Nachman kasha ma'ishna karka dilo." Why is it that on karka the bachar won't get pi shnayim? The lav ha karka shava kavun, because Father Avram did not leave behind this land. There was a lien against it. It was collateralized, but ultimately, again, it was not owned by Father Avram himself. Well, if that's the case, Mos nami lav hani mos shava kavun. I guess he's saying about money. How about saying right? When you lend someone money, that money becomes theirs, and when you get paid back, halacha doesn't view you getting paid back as the same money that you lent. That's new money. That's new money. So the same way that you're tining, that the estate has absolutely no connection to that property. It's collateralized, but it's not muhsak, it's not owned. So to the estate has no claim, has no right, has no ownership. It's not muhsak in that money either. V'od, furthermore, Hamar of Nachman Arab Baravua Yisomim Shagavu Karka Bechova Savian Balchov Choser the Gova Mehen. Oh, watch this. We'll say so many great cases coming our way over here. Watch this. Let's say, we'll say same case. Avram lent money, right? Avram lent money to Reuven, lent him $1 million. The Yisomim ended up collecting collecting property in satisfaction of debt, right? Reuven didn't have money. So instead they took $1 million of real estate. So now the Yisomim have $1 million of real estate. Now what happens afterwards? There are other debts of the estate. So now let's say, so the same way that, Avram had lent money to Reuven, Avram has a creditor in Shimon. So Shimon comes to collect the debt. So the Gemara says as follows: Shimon can collect the debt from property that the Yisomim collected in satisfaction of a loan. What does that show you? That shows you that land must be muchzak. Because Rabbi say is another important halach over here. Yisomim are obligated to pay back the debts of their father's estate. But there is a ceiling. What's the ceiling? They're never obligated to use their own assets to satisfy their father's debts. In other words, they're responsible to pay back the debts of the estate, assuming that they can pay back those debts from the money of the estate itself, never obligated to dip into their own personal assets. So look what the Gemara just said over here. So we'll say, right, this is a two-pronged case. So Avram had lent money to Reuven, $1 million. Reuven couldn't pay back cash. The Yisomim take land in satisfaction of that debt. Now, in another part of this, another chapter of this story. So Avram had borrowed $500,000 from Shimon. Shimon now come collect. Now let's say so we have no cash. Shimon says, no problem. I'll take that property. That you just collected from Reuven. What's the halacha? He can. What does that show you? That shows you, I will say, that property is viewed ultimately again as a state property, which shows that halacha l'maisa, that property is viewed as owed by Avram himself, as owned by the estate itself, which sounds like therefore that property should be viewed as muchzak and not as roi. Well, that contradicts what Rav Nachman said. Okay, so now this, remember again, this was Abaye talking to Rabba, and Abaye outlining his kashas both on Rabba's position and Rav Nachman. So Rabba responds, Lo the Didi kasha, v'lo the Rav Nachman kasha. So Rabba says, look, I'm going to be honest with you, it's nice talking to you, but Lemaisa again, your kasha on me is not good, and your kasha on Nachman is not good. See, here we go. So this is great. So Rabba diffuses the whole thing. How does Rabba diffuse the whole thing? Rabba says, Rav Nachman and I were not actually espousing our own opinions. We were explaining the position of the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael. Right? The Rabbanim of Eretz, because what happened over here? That if you remember again, the Ameimar said, right? Ameimar came along and said, "Bechar no tel pishnayim b'milveh, aval lo beribis." Right? So Ameimar came along and Ameimar made a statement. So Rabbi and Rav Nachman saying Ameimar was reflecting the view of the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael, and we were just simply explaining what he was saying. We were not espousing our own positions. We were explaining the aforementioned case. So therefore, remember, you're going to say the whole thing will hop over here is that Abaye brought contradictions to the stated positions on Rabbah and Rav Nachman on the bottom of Kuf Chaf Daled Amud Beis. So Rabbah comes along and says, hey, hold up. Those aren't our personal positions. Those are explanations of the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael. We ourselves don't hold that way. Okay, so just diffused the entire thing. So then but let's go back and analyze a bit more. So the Gemara says, my Safta, now the Gemara says, by the way, what's the case of Safta? Because remember again, the kasha that Abaye brought on Rabbah himself was from the case of the grandmother. What's the case of the grandmother? Here we go. So the Gemara says, Dahuda Amar Lahu, right? So there was a guy, now again remember, this works best, Rashban points out, is if you frame this as a case of a Shchiv Meira. So right, so let's call him Reuven, right? So Reuven is a Shchiv Meira. He's on his deathbed. So what does Reuven say? He says, Damar Lahu, Amud Beis, Nechasai L'Safta, Basra liyarsai. So what happens? So Reuven says, listen, Reuven had an elderly grandmother. So Reuven wants his grandmother to be taken care of, right? So again, just to set this up, Reuven's been caring for his grandmother while she was alive. Now, unfortunately, again, he is going to predecease her. So he says, when I die, I want my property to go to Safta. Property goes to Safta. Basra liyarsai. But after Safta dies, now again, what Reuven is saying is like this. I don't want my property going to Safta's inheritors. I want my property going to my inheritors. So right now, essentially what Reuven is doing is he's making a deathbed gift. That deathbed gift will obviously prevent any of his inheritors from inheriting it right now. Let it go to Safta. But after Safta dies, I want it to continue down to my heirs. Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Ubasra liyarsai, achar mos zikenti, Lo yirshu yarshin shelah, kigon b'na, o bita, o avia, o acheha. After Safta dies, I don't want her inheritors to get the property. Eli yarshin sheli. I want it to go to my heirs. Kigon b'ni, o biti, o achia, karov kodem. Fine. So what happened? So remember, Reuven in this case had a daughter. We'll call her Rachel, right? So Reuven had a daughter named Rachel. Dahavin is Siva, and Rachel was married to Yaakov, right? So again, we'll say just to get our whole family true over here. There's Reuven. We're just going to call Safta Safta. She doesn't need a first name. She's just Safta, right? So there's Safta, and then Reuven has a daughter Rachel, and Rachel's married to Yaakov. Reuven's on his deathbed. He wants property to go to Safta. Fine. Reuven dies. Property goes to Safta. That's where the property is right now. Rachel is married to Yaakov. What happens? Shchiva b'chaye baila or b'chaye Safta. Unfortunately, Rachel dies. Rachel predeceases Safta and predeceases her husband. So right now, there are two people left in the family. I mean, more than two people left, but for our purposes, Safta, right? Safta and Safta's grandson-in-law, Yaakov. Okay. Basra de Shchiva Safta. Safta died. Asa Baal Katava. So Safta died, and Yaakov is Tovei the property. He waited till after the Levaya. Right? So now what happens? Right? So Safta died, and now Yaakov says, the property is mine. Now again, what's Yaakov's logic? What's Yaakov's logic to say that the property is his? Remember, who was in line to inherit the property? Was Rachel, his wife. Rachel died, and therefore Yaakov feels that he stands in her stead, ultimately to inherit the property. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Amar Huna, liyarsi, vafila liyarsi yarsi. Rav Huna says, yeah, Yaakov's right. Because what did Reuven say? Reuven said, when Safta dies, I want this property to go to my inheritors. And what does it mean to my inheritors? Even to the inheritors of my inheritors. Okay. So in other words, it is correct. I feel liyarsi. Rav Anan said liyarsi velo liyarsi yarsi. Rav Anan said no. What Reuven meant was I wanted to go to my inheritors, but not to the inheritors of my inheritors. Okay, so we're gonna have to define this a little bit. So the Gemara says, so if Rabbi say fundamental machlokes. So the Gemara says as follows. Okay, so let's analyze. So shalchum mitam. So they sent from there. So mitam means from marriage. So they sent from there. Hilchosa kavasit Ravanan. The halacha follows Ravanan. Velav mitame, but not for his reasoning. So you're both saying, what's interesting is as follows. Ravanan seems to say like this. Ravanan says, we look at Reuven's statement. What was Reuven's statement? Reuven said, I'm giving my property to Safta, and when Safta dies, I want it to go to my heirs. Right? So Ravanan says, what that means is to my heirs, but not to the heirs of my heirs. So comes along the Gemara and says, we pass like Ravanan, namely, Yaakov, surviving husband, right? Surviving husband, son-in-law of Reuven, grandson-in-law of Safta, is not going to inherit. But not for the reason that Rav Anan espoused. How so? Listen to this. So Rav Anan savar, afagav da havile bra lebarte lo yaris. So let's clear this out for just a second. Let's say, for example, same case, right? So Reuven's on his deathbed, granting the property to Safta. It comes with the stipulation, after Safta dies, I want it to go to my heir, which in this case, Reuven has one daughter, Rachel, and Rachel's married to Yaakov. Let's say Rachel and Yaakov had a son. We'll call him Levi. Right? Rachel and Yaakov have a son. So according to Rav Anan, if Rachel were to predecease Yaakov, and to predecease Safta, according to Rav Anan, Levi, the grandson, or in this case the great grandson, would not inherit. Because Rav Anan understands Reuven's statement to dafka mean, I want the property to go to my heir and that's it, not to the heir of my heir. So meanwhile the Gemara says Velohi, and that's incorrect. De'ilu havile bra lebarte vadai yaris. The halacha Rabbosai is if Rachel and Yaakov were to have a son by the name of Levi, I probably should have just called him Yosef just to keep it easy, right? If Rachel and Yaakov were to have a son named Yosef, everyone agrees the halacha is that Yosef would inherit. Yosef absolutely would inherit. Why? Because again, this loops back to our previous sugya. Remember again, because children inherit the inheritance spot of their parents. So essentially, in this case over here, if Rachel and Yaakov had a son Yosef, and Rachel were to predecease her husband and to predecease Savta, when Savta died, the property absolutely would go to Yosef because Yosef is viewed as occupying the inheritance spot of his now deceased mother, Rachel. Everyone agrees. But yet, interestingly enough, according to Rav Anan, that would not be the case. So the Gemara says, we paskin like Rav Anan that Yaakov is not going to inherit it, but not because of Rav Anan's logic. Rav Anan's logic is because he's being very explicit and specific with the statement of Reuven. And when Reuven says, after Savta dies, I want my heir to inherit this property, for some reason Rav Anan understands that to only mean his direct heir, his daughter, no one else. To the point that even if there was a grandson, Rav Anan would say he wouldn't inherit. The Gemara says, but that's not true. That's false. A grandson absolutely would inherit. Velohi, tilu havile bra lebarta vadayaris. So if that's the case, so according to Rav Anan, or according to us, why doesn't Yaakov inherit? Right? So we'll say, so essentially, just think about it for just a second. Remember again, what's the case? What's the case in front of the Beis Din? Who's standing in front of the Beis Din right now? Who's standing there? Yaakov. Right, Yaakov, the surviving husband of Rachel, who was the daughter of Reuven, the granddaughter of Savta, right? She predeceased her grandmother, predeceased her husband. So Yaakov's now in Beis Din claiming, I'm the inheritor, give me the property. So the Beis Din's going to tell him, absolutely not. You're not the inheritor, we're not giving you the property. Why not? Why not? Shabbos says it's fascinating. Why not? Ubal hainu taimad lo yaris mishum tahavide ra'ui. Wow. Ve'ein habal note barai kiva mochsak. It's a different case also. Remember again, a husband inherits his wife. But what does he inherit? He inherits only property that she actually owns at the time of her death. He does not inherit entitlements. By the way, this is interesting because in this respect, a bachar and the husband are very similar. Both inherit muhsak, neither inherit roi. Or I should say, don't get their specific inheritance rights with roi. So therefore, again, when Rachel predeceased Savta, at the time that Rachel died, what does she have? She has a right. She has a right. She has absolutely no claim, right? There's no entitlement that she has. So that's why, again, husband doesn't inherit her. Again, it's a din in Yerusha. It's not. So one second. Here's the problem. The problem, as well say, is remember that Rav Huna argued on Rav Anan, and according to Rav Huna, Yaakov, the surviving husband, does inherit Savta's property, or what was originally Reuven's property. So Mechlad Rav Huna Savar, Baal Nota B'Reika Mochsak. So according to Rav Huna, do we say that a husband acquires roi, entitlement, like actual property? And I both say no one holds that way. Amar Lazar, davar zeh niftach bigdolim v'nistayim bigtanim. So this is great. So Rabbi Lazar says, this machlokes was started amongst giants, Rav Huna and Rav Anan, and we're going to go ahead and literally conclude it with people of much smaller stature. He was referring to himself. In other words, this machlokes started with giants, and again, it's someone like me, much smaller stature, is going to go ahead and conclude it. What does it mean? Kala omer acharecha ke omer me'ach shavdami. Oh, wow. Wow. And I will say, what's that play over here? What's that play over here is, what is the status of a gift when you say me'acharecha? You see, in this case over here, Reuven is doing something very interesting. Reuven is on his deathbed, and what he's saying is, Savta, the property is yours, and after you, I want the property to go to my daughter Rachel. So, what is the status of such a statement? So interestingly enough, Rav Huna holds that whenever you say acharecha, it's like me'achshav. essentially, because Reuven is specifically outlining the progression of the gift, it's as if Rachel acquires it as of now. It's not considered to be roi. Rather, it's considered to be muchsak, since there is a clear line of what's called property progression. Take a look at the Rashbam. It's in the third wide line. Because So we'll say this is incredible. According to Rav Huna, Rav Huna sees it as like this. According to Rav Huna, when Reuven makes the gift to Savta, get ready for this. It's as if he's already giving his daughter Rachel actual title and physical possession of the property. What about Savta? Ela shezekenti tochel peros b'chayeha v'achar kach tikach biti. So this is incredible. According to Rav Huna, the way he reviews this gift is like this. In reality, when Reuven is on his deathbed, who is he giving the property to? Who is he giving it to? He's giving it to his daughter. But Savta has the right of usage for the duration of her life. So according to Rav Huna, really what's happened over here is Reuven has conveyed title already now. Therefore, again, when Rachel predeceases her husband Yaakov, at the end of the day, that property is not considered to be roi. Rather, what is it? It's muchsak. And that's why, according to Rav Huna, halacha l'maisa, again, Yaakov has a right to inherit her because it's muchsak. Incredible. But I will say, but it all hinges on this concept. That according, essentially, really what's come out over here is, what's the machlokes? The machlokes is, how do we view this gift, legabe Rachel? According to Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, kala omer acharecha, ki omer me'achshav. In reality, we view this gift as Reuben is actually transferring title over to Rachel now, and Savta has the right to consume peros, but is not the owner. According to Rav Anan, that's not what's happening over here. According to Rav Anan, so Reuven is giving title to Savta, and when Savta dies, then and only then does title transfer over to Rachel. What's the nafkamina between the two approaches? This case, Rachel predeceases Yaakov. Does Yaakov inherit the property after Savta dies? According to Rav Huna, absolutely yes, because Rachel was the owner of this property already during her lifetime. According to Rav Anan, absolutely not, because it's roi and not muchsak. Incredible, absolutely incredible. The Gemara, so 1 second. Amar Rabba, mistabra tamid v'nei ma'arava. So Rabba says, the truth is, the logic of Menei Ma'arava makes sense. Why? Di'i kadim Savta v'zavna zevini. See, Rabbi say, here's what's interesting. It's hard to say that Savta has title. Right? I'm sorry. It's hard to say that Rachel, daughter, has title. Right? Why? Because we'll say, what happens if Savta were to sell the property? What would happen if Savta sold the property? The sale would work. Now, what does that tell you? That Savta is really the owner of this property until her death, and then only upon her death does title transfer down to Rachel. And if that's the case, really, this is a case of Roi and not Muchsak. So the Gemara says, Papa says, Eina Baal Nota Baraki Muchsak. So I will say, so now the Gemara is going to end off with some interesting halachas, right? Some halacha l'maisa. Someone says, so number one, says Rav Papa, number one, a husband only acquires with Ra'i, the husband does not acquire with Ra'i like Muchsak. Just before we go to that, the halacha is we paskin ultimately, again, like Rav Anan, that the husband does not go ahead and acquire the property. In this case, Yaakov does not acquire the property because the property is viewed as Roi, not Muchsak. Why is it viewed as Roi, not Muchsak? For the reason we just espoused before. Since if Savta were to sell it, the sale would be valid. That shows that ultimately, again, Savta really has a title, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, Rachel does not. Rachel is Roi, not Muchsak. So if Rachel predeceases her husband does not acquire in Roi like he acquires in Muchsak. Good. That leads the Gemara to this conclusion. Amra Papa Hilchasa Eina Baal Notel Barai Ki B'Muchsak. So we'll say halach number one. Now we're going to rattle off some halach l'maisa over here. Number one. A husband, when he acquires his wife, if his wife predeceases him, a husband is a first position inheritor, but only inherits muchsak, not roi. Only inherits ultimately, again, the items that she actively owns at the time of the marriage, and not any entitlements. Next, number 2, a bachar only acquires muchsak. Now we say, remember here, what does that mean? A bachar only gets pishnayim, double portion, in muchsak, that which is actively owned by the estate, and not that which is simply entitled. Now again, remember, he does inherit in roi as well, but how does he inherit roi? Just like a regular brother. Next, ve'ein habachar notal pishnayim milva, bein shegavu karka, bein shegavu mos. Okay, we'll say next. We're going through it all. Furthermore, a bachar does not get pishnayim in any loan repayments, right? So again, remember going back to our previous case, Father Avram died. He had lent $1 million to Shimon. Shimon pays back the debt. Whether debt is paid back in property or paid in cash, ultimately, Bachar does not get pishnayim in a loan. What's the logic? What's the logic behind that? Because every loan is considered to be ra'ui and not muchsak. Whether that loan is paid back with collateralized property or that loan is considered to be cash or paid back with cash, it is always ra'ui, not muchsak, and therefore again, all the brothers will share in it equally. Bachar does not get pishnayim. Interesting exception to this rule, not exception, but qualification. Top of Kuf Chavav, Umilva She'imo. Oh, what happens? We'll say, watch this, watch this. What happens? Same case, Avraham has 2 sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. Yitzchak is the Bachar. What happens if halacha l'maisa, Yitzchak lent his father money? Yitzchak lent his father money. So now what happens? So now halacha l'maisa again. So now Yitzchak, right? Father dies. Now the estate has to pay back Yitzchak. So does Yitzchak, listen to this, you hear this? Does Yitzchak get pishnayim in his own repayment of the debt, right? Remember, I say differently, right? So in other words, now, remember, Yitzchak has a claim against the estate. Yitzchak lent his father $1 million. So now again, Avram died, so Yitzchak's going to get repaid from the estate. Does Yitzchak get pishnayim? Now, both say now, what would be the logic ultimately? Again, we just said that a bachar doesn't get pishnayim. Does he get the repayment of a debt? Maybe this case is different. Yitzchak is a chacham, right? Yitzchak learns daf Yomi. So what does Yitzchak know? Yitzchak knows that halacha l'maisa, maybe if he conveys full ownership of collateralized property, ultimately, again, I should say differently. Yeah, if he conveys, right? If full. Maybe his kavana, maybe Yitzchak's kavana was that halacha l'maisa, again, he would acquire full ownership of the collateralized property, therefore again make it muchsak, and by making it muchsak, ultimately he'd get pishnayim. To which the Gemara says, Amrav Huna, Amrav Asi, Mava She'imo Palgi. Because we're not sure what to do with that, we would have to split that particular difference. So again, that case seems to be a safek case. So because it's a safek case, they would split what would have been halacha l'maisa, that pishnayim. Now, I just want to point out, just in the 1 minute we have left, the one thing that the Gemara did not resolve over here is what about the machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanon, right? Remember again, what about that case ultimately again of property that appreciates on its own? So this is interesting because there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction in the Rambam himself, but it sounds like this. In the case of, let's say, the palm, remember I gave you 2 cases. If you have a palm tree and the palm tree got bigger, just by itself, it would appear that halacha l'maisa, in that case, the bachar would get pishnayim. That's literally considered to be appreciation that is happening all by itself. But in the other cases of where halacha l'maisa, let's say the cow gave birth, in that case there would not be pishnayim. That would be considered to be ra'ui and not muchsak. All right, to both say, shkoyach everyone, a lot today. Short off, but a lot of information. Shkoyach, we'll stop here. All right, Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Thank you.